Thanks for joining us today for our monthly Big Tent Climate Talk series that spotlights different leaders in the climate community. At CCL, we know that climate change requires a variety of policies and perspectives. This is why we do our work under a big tent that includes folks from the right, the left, and every spot in between. In our Big Tent Climate Talk episodes, we'll talk to a wide variety of climate leaders outside of CCL to learn more about how we can work better together. For those of you that don't know, my name is Kammien. I'm the Senior Business Relations Representative in the DC office. My work focuses on building the coalition of business and industry partners in our Big Tent. Overall, our DC team keeps a pulse on what other organizations are doing and finds ways that CCL can collaborate or work with them. It is my hope that our session today gives you a taste of how our team's conversations with organizations go. For our episode today, CCL is pleased to be hosting a conversation with Schrodt, the Legislative Affairs Manager, focusing on climate at the Niskanen Center. Before I officially introduce Corey, I want to just share a few gentle reminders. At CCL, we love our focus and we're open-minded. So today's focus is on listening and learning from experiences of fellow climate advocates. If you bump into a moment or a reaction where someone shares something you feel differently about, really lean into that, see what this is an opportunity to learn about the larger climate movement and better understand a different perspective. In that vein, building support for climate policy, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, we know that it will require the biggest, broadest coalition possible. And that's why we want to host conversations like this. Learning from each other and working together is how we get this job done. So with that, I will introduce today's guest. A bit more about Corey. Corey Schrodt is the Government Relations Manager for Climate Policy at the Niskanen Center. Prior to joining the Niskanen Center, Corey spent a decade on Capitol Hill, cementing a reputation for working on both sides of the aisle to advance legislation. He most recently served as Chief of Staff for Congressman Francis Rooney, a conservative climate champion and a leader on carbon tax policy. Over his decade on the Hill, Corey served with 3 members of Congress and is an expert in congressional operations and how to convert policy ideas into actionable legislation. Further, as Congressman Rooney's advisor, while he served as co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus, Corey led bipartisan efforts to create significant, lasting change on climate policy. Corey is obviously very familiar with CCL, considering Congressman Rooney's support for EICDA. It goes without saying how much we appreciated that. And now that I've talked enough, Corey, is there anything else you'd like folks to know on this call about you that I might have missed?
No, I think that's a wonderful summation of who I am and how I've gotten to this space. Just honored to have worked for Mr. Rooney and had the opportunity to interact with CCL and so many volunteers over the years.
Well, terrific. That's great. We feel really fortunate to have you as a guest this month. We know, Niskanen definitely recognizes the power of a well-designed carbon price to reduce carbon emissions and are working hard toward getting that policy implemented. So I'd like to just go ahead and transition our conversation so that I can do less talking into the kind of Q&A portion. And then after we run through the questions we have prepped, we'll take some questions from the audience. How's that sound?
Great.
Great. Well, why don't you share a little bit about how you got into the climate space and kind of your interest there and how you got into the policy area?
Definitely. So I've worked for, as you mentioned, 3 members on Capitol Hill. 2 of them were not what I would consider climate focused. Mr. Rooney, when he joined Congress in, I think it was 2017, January 2017, came in with a very environmental focus, very local environmental focus. Over his first year in Congress, really started to expand on that and look at the global implications and started searching for policies that would be best poised to tackle those questions, which is how we landed on carbon tax. So really, I owe a lot of my start to just being in the right place at the right time and having the open mind and wherewithal to explore these opportunities.
That's terrific. Sometimes it is about, being at the right place at the right time, like you said, and having somebody that's, a leader like Congressman Rooney who wanted to get involved and be a part of the solution for his constituents. So what projects and areas of focus related to climate does Niskanen work on?
So we started out primarily working, our climate team started out primarily working on carbon tax. And we hold the policy designs with a pretty open hand on what the revenue side looks like, what you can do with the revenue. Our focus has generally been how do you get the reduction, how do you get to the reduction targets that you need, and what does that price look like? And so those have been a lot of the questions that we've looked at over the years. We've since been expanding into green industrial policy areas. And then in addition to that, we have an expert on staff who works exclusively on transmission. So there's the idea that as we go to more electrification, we're going to need more capacity on the grid. And what does that look like? How do we get energy from place to place and improve upon the reliability that I think we've seen some concerning lessons learned about some of the reliability aspects earlier this year, and we'd like to see that improved.
Great. And when you say the green industrial components, does that mean like carbon-free steels, things like that, or?
Exactly. So we had a very large paper that was produced by one of our colleagues who has since left, Nodder, on green industrial policy, looking at exactly that high carbon intensity projects and how does that look moving forward, and what are you going to have to do policy design wise to get us to a net zero figure.
Great. And obviously, you mentioned that Niskanen has an openness to how the revenue, what happens with the revenue from a carbon tax. And as you know from Congressman Rooney's support of EICDA, CCL's original starting point was the 100% dividend. And that's been something that CCL's had to work through in kind of the reconciliation lens, is that that's not possible in reconciliation, given that would be budget neutral and therefore you can't do it. And so the 100% revenue or a dividend, that is. And so I know that that's, part of our analysis and conversation too, about like, where are we willing to negotiate and what do we think the best uses of that revenue are and how much of it needs to still be used as a dividend. So I think we're in a similar space to you, as where we're kind of waiting to see where the conversation goes. Definitely have our preferences, but be willing to adapt a little bit to the reconciliation environment that we're in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the art of the possible at this point, right? We're presented with an opportunity and figuring out how to get, majority of what we want, which is lower carbon emissions without having an overall negative effect on the economy. I think those are the two big questions that have to be asked.
Oh, that's great. So then when it comes to Niskanen, stepping back a little bit, looking at Niskanen as a whole again, what do you find that either this could be inside the Beltway or outside that people assume about the organization that maybe isn't actually true?
I mean, I would assume that most people just don't even know that we exist. We're a pretty young organization. I recognize that CCL is pretty young as well, but we were founded in 2015, and I think been able to fly under the radar in a lot of respects. So, I think, yeah, I don't know of too many preconceived notions of the organization at this point. Hopefully not too many are negative, but I do think that we are still kind of building out what our profile looks like and the public facing aspect of that.
Yeah, I would say, considering the relative youth of both of our organizations, I think it's safe to say that we both punch above our weight, so to speak. I think both of us have, become pretty effective at communicating our policy desires and providing the kind of political support behind it to get things done. So I think we're good partners in that way. So what is Niskanen doing, today, this week, this month? Obviously, as we've talked about, briefly, reconciliation is kind of taking all the oxygen out of the room, so to speak, in DC. But what is Niskanen working on in that realm or other places?
Well, we have a really good partnership with CCL, and we talk weekly with your guys' team and just kind of try and keep on the same page about we're talking to so and so, we're talking to so and so. I think that the talents that we've been bringing the past few weeks has been some of our expert review of some of the policy designs. We have an expert on staff, Shutine Pomerlo, who is really just a carbon tax expert, and especially border adjustment stuff. So, as different options get brought up, we can take a look at that and produce a blog post, produce an op-ed, that sort of thing. So we've been trying to feed in our evaluation of policies while continuing our conversations with offices and coalition allies.
And again, I feel like I'm, repeating myself here, but that's another place you just mentioned where, we certainly have found ourselves aligned, which is with the necessity of the border adjustment piece and what that could look like and why it's important and the impact of that policy. It's interesting. There's an interesting discussion about that going on the Hill right now about can you do it without a border? Can you do it standalone without a carbon fee or and what does that look like on the global scale?
We were asked for our feedback on that, and we gave our feedback. It's a unique concept, and I think we're very excited that people are trying to figure out how to address this, as it's going to be, obviously, the EU has implemented their CBAM, and you have Canada talking about doing something similar. It's going to be a very big deal for going back to the green industrial policy aspect. They're the ones who are those are the industries that are going to bear the brunt of this, and we need to figure out ways to help them compete globally. From our perspective, and I think CCL's perspective, the easiest way to do that is to implement a carbon tax and border adjust off of that. Absent that, I think it's good to at least continue the conversation and just stress how important this is going to be, how this is going to be a global issue to deal with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you touched on that alignment there, where it certainly is about the potential for emissions reduction and why that implementation is important from that perspective. But then, the other aspect of it is absolutely the global competitiveness aspect and what it would mean for both of them to do these at the same time. So definitely on board there. So you kind of touched on it, and I know we do connect regularly. But CCL, obviously, our strength is absolutely our grassroots strength with our volunteers across the country in every congressional district. And thank you for that. I think our volunteers are absolutely terrific, and definitely agree nobody is on par. But what are your thoughts about how we can best be in the movement together? I know you mentioned some things we're doing together, but what else? Do you have more thoughts on that, or what else do you think?
I think it's right now the conversation is as important as it ever has been. So just any opportunity to talk with staff, any opportunity to engage with members, I think you have to absolutely seize it. Sometimes there can be this sense of, oh, Congress is busy, we should leave them alone. But like, we're at a moment where they're busy on something that this fits very neatly into the general broad carbon tax idea, fits very neatly into reconciliation. And so we ought to be attacking this as a very serious opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's great. So on that front, we've obviously, our organizations have been working together, and coalition building takes a lot of bandwidth. Not every group is focused on that for lots of reasons. But how important for Niskanen is working with other groups? And have you had experiences with any other particular groups and organizations that you partner with that you found like the most beneficial, an example of the most helpful way that they interacted with you?
Everybody brings a different expertise to the table, right? We don't have a grassroots organization. We're not particularly well connected with the White House. but we do know members on the Hill. We do know staffers on the Hill. You know, the leverage that CCL brings and just the understanding of where every member of Congress is and just the broad swath that you guys cut, to the coalition members that maybe are a little bit more to the left that can help us figure out how we deal with some of the more liberal elements of the party, and how do we talk to them and come to some sort of resolution. Everybody has a different role to play. It's hard to just guess at who's doing what if you're not all talking. And so picking up the phone and building a coalition is absolutely critical of just in the efficiency of the movement at large, and the impact.
Yeah, no, I think that I could not agree more with that answer. I think one of the real challenges when you don't have to make that effort to have coalitions, and have those conversations is the kind of wasted energy, the redundant efforts. So instead of moving the ball forward, everybody's just kind of doing the same thing and paddling or treading water. Nobody's moving forward. And so I know that has been a huge focus for our organization for the last 8 months. Has been, we've really got to start having these external conversations to find out who knows what, how can we all share information, how can we take effective action that uses grassroots strength and somebody else uses their grass top strength, and we do that at the same time. Really working to be strategic and effective, because as from CCL's perspective, like as a nonprofit volunteer-led organization, there are going to be things that you can accomplish with, you have good tools but you don't have some other tools, and the only way to really get it done is to bring them all together. So I know that that's been a huge reason why we've enjoyed working with Niskanen so much over the last several months as we work together on this. I have been getting a couple of questions coming in from the chat, so I'm going to do a couple of those. One of our volunteers asked, considering that the carbon tax we both advocate is a powerful solution, how do you explain the degree of pushback by some in the media, some academics, politicians, etc.?
As far as politicians, that kind of boils down to who their constituency is, who they're talking to, and quite frankly, what they're hearing. Each group is going to be different. My apologies. My daughter is home. She's not feeling good today. So it's, the EJ groups in particular have been burned so many times by people, different groups acting like they're listening. I think that they have some very legitimate concerns. And we've kind of walked through some of those and taken a look at what the complaints are. I think that there are opportunities to design, make tweaks within carbon tax policy to address some of those concerns, and I think that they ought to be heard out. That's why it's critical to bring kind of these different coalitions together, because we can have those types of conversations. We can talk to some of the more left-leaning organizations. We can talk to some of the more right-leaning organizations about corporate support, and how do you get corporate backing on something like this. I'm not sure that we're going to get it. I'm not sure that we're going to secure an endorsement from EJ groups, but I think that there has to be at least an effort to understand what the concerns are and build those concerns into the conversation and the ultimate policy design. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think, I don't know what you Niskanen thinks specifically, but I think from the CCL perspective, there was an example of that effort in the legislative side to listen to
EJ groups and groups that feel that, for one reason or another, a price would be damaging or harmful, I should say. And, I think the Save Our Futures Act from Senator Whitehouse was an effort to try and find ways to kind of work through the policy lens of a carbon price and figure out where that revenue could be, relegated to assuage some of those, address some of those concerns, and find ways to help make it more, palatable or helpful. And I think so. I definitely think we've seen examples of that effort just in a piece of legislation.
Definitely.
Yeah. Another question I have here is, and this is a tough one for you, so, because I don't know the answer to this either, saying how much of the revenue stream would be needed for a reconciliation? Needed is the keyword here. I think my personal perspective on this question is, I think that comes down to what is the entire suite of pay-fors for the package. But I'm curious what your perspective is.
Well, it depends on a lot. I think what might have to happen is figuring out what's needed on the dividend side, because I think that is going to be a critical component, and working backwards from there. And at the same time, you're simultaneously going to have to look at what the price is and what the escalators are. Anytime you're designing these policies, when it's just theoretical, there's a wide range of outcomes. This is going to be very much a real test, or real world test of what those balances look like when you're talking to 50 different senators and figuring out where their priorities lay and what's going to be acceptable and not acceptable.
Yeah.
So that's a long way to say that I don't know the exact percentage, but I think that my understanding is this is going to be very much a sweetener on top of a lot of things that are discussed. And I'm sure that they will find ways to use portions of the revenue as pay-fors. But I think the way that Senator Whitehouse approaches this, and considering how central he's been to all of the conversations, the dividend is going to be the major outcome of any potential policy. I
think I agreed. And I think the interesting thing on the dividend as well is, where the administration lands in that part of the conversation, because, I know it's clear that the administration has concerns about, costs to consumers and the average taxpayer, and they've made this $400,000 commitment on tax increases. And so, I think they're going to want to find a way to have the dividend help them meet that commitment, and also try to keep, the appearance of increased costs down on consumers, real or appeared increased costs on consumers down. So yeah, there's a lot of factors here on how exactly that's going to play out. And I think we'll know more as time, it's going to be evolving until the last minute, I think. I would imagine you agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know we talked broadly about, Niskanen's support, for border adjustment and for price. Going back before we were in a reconciliation world, what was kind of Niskanen's ideal, preferred way of designing an ambitious climate policy? And then, how has that evolved as this process has moved forward?
Good question. I think that the way that we have approached it is, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, the focus is what's the right price, and how do you get there with the right escalators as a starting point. And I think that we've been very flexible in what that can look like, and then also in terms of what the revenue side looks like. So just as a little bit of background, so when I was with Mr. Rooney, I worked with the Niskanen Center to design a carbon tax policy for Mr. Rooney that would reduce payroll taxes. The Niskanen Center has also worked with previously Congressman Curbelo and now Mr. Fitzpatrick on the oh no, I'm going to blank on the Market Choice Act, which eliminates the gas tax and replaces the revenue side with a carbon tax. So we have held the revenue side very, very open-handed, but I think that the near-term expectation is needing to be somewhere around $50 a ton relatively soon. Probably not immediately, but relatively soon. And within that, designing a good border adjustment. So both the Market Choice Act and Mr. Rooney's carbon tax bill both included border adjustment pieces, as does the CCL endorsed bill. I think that's becoming a bigger talking point. Going back to the conversation about the EU's CBAM, I think that as corporations start to figure out the competitive disadvantage that they may be placed at when having to deal with those types of regimes, they're going to be much more interested in the carbon tax conversation, as that's the easiest way to build in what their costs are and how to rebate or be taxed.
No, that's very helpful. I think what it strikes me from everything you said is that really the starting point for you all is the emissions reductions, because if your starting point is the price point, well, that's informed by the emissions reductions. So your real starting point is all driven by the emissions reductions goals that you see as critical, and that certainly CCL and I believe probably everybody on this call right now agrees are absolutely critical, and that's reducing our carbon emissions. So thank you for that. A question that just came in, and I'm interested just in your perspective here. I think I can guess, but the question is that Jennifer Granholm, Secretary Granholm, says she believes in carrots, not sticks. I think that's where we probably see like the design of a CPP, EPP, and other things come from. But do you see carbon fee and dividend as a carrot or a stick, or some combination of both?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a carrot for those who figure it out first, figure out how to reduce their emissions with the same amount of power generation. The administration is having a very difficult time figuring out how they want to tackle the problem, and it's a very complex problem, and I certainly don't I certainly sympathize with how they're how they have to tackle it. I also am not sure that we're at that point in the conversation where if you look at the way that corporations understand a carbon tax, they've figured it out. They're supportive of it because they can figure out how to work within that mechanism. I don't know that I guess it's difficult to characterize it as a carrot or a stick, but it certainly is one of the more preferred policies when you start talking to some of the larger emitters, because they know how to price that in, and they know how to long-term develop alternative technologies and kind of space that out.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you point out that they know how to price it in, and I'm sure you have had conversations like this as well. What's interesting in conversations with some large corporations or industries, a number of them have already implemented internal prices. They have internal prices on carbon that they are using in kind of their cost analysis, and so it is a little bit. It's interesting that, and I realize it's an interesting dynamic right now, I think, for a complicated dynamic right now for businesses as well, in the sense that I think if this was a standalone carbon price bill, you'd have more that seemed so imminent. You'd have some more vocal support or public support from businesses. I think that the size of the package, well, I don't think it's common. It's pretty apparent that the size of the package and the full scope of it has led businesses to be in a stance where they just say we're not going to support any of this, as opposed to communicating the portions that they do support for in a more nuanced way, that they do support in a more nuanced way, and then communicating their opposition to the other components. But maybe over time we'll see more of that nuanced communication.
Well, and I think there's also a difference between the regulatory stick that can be very very penalizing and very difficult to. There's just not much flexibility in how they. I mean, when you're mandating scrubbers,
right.
That's very different than just saying, okay, you have to get to these. This is your price. Figure out how to get under it so that you're still profitable. I think I don't know, maybe it's a smaller stick, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's a very different carbon tax is a very different approach than the regulatory scheme that can be overly prescriptive and overly penalizing.
Yeah, and I agree that a design kind of mandate from a regulation is kind of defining a one size fits all solution that can be difficult for some organizations. Instead of adapting, they just have what they're supposed to do. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Well, in this vein, one of the questions that's come through is how the U.S. Chamber has been responding in the latest discussions around reconciliation. So what have you been hearing?
I mean, they're going to crush this thing with all their might if they can. They've made the ad box. You can follow the money and where their heart's at. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, and I'm not sure that's going to change. They have very specific and particular interests. And I think that the outsized one for them is the corporate tax implications for the package. I think I don't know that there's any policy that you could put in there that would get them over their concern for those issues. And that's not to speak about any of their other concerns with the package, whether it's size, scope, or otherwise.
No, I tend to agree that that seems to be the primary driving concern, and kind of what they're solely focused on in the package, as far as how they're evaluating it. And I haven't seen any indication that that's going to change. And in fact, there was a panel just last week, I believe, where the representative for the chamber characterized the bill as not a meaningful climate bill, and there was a WRI panelist on there who kind of pushed back and said, like, this is the most comprehensive climate legislation we've really ever seen in this country. So anyway, there was that kind of messaging.
That also says something about the size and scope of what we've attempted so far, but that's another conversation.
That's a fair statement. Yes. Well, getting into kind of the nitty gritty of reconciliation from there, somebody asked, and this is a tough one for you too. Somebody asked, one of our guests asked, what would the parliamentarian require to qualify for reconciliation? I know that's a tough one, but do your best.
Yeah, I mean, if you can figure out what makes it past the parliamentarian, you would get paid a lot more money than anybody I know. No, it's the budgetary impacts are going to be kind of the key focal point, and what goes into their decision process after that. I don't know that I would characterize it quite as a black box, but it's very particular and can certainly be subjective. So I think that I'm skeptical when somebody tells me they know what's going to happen with the parliamentarian.
Yeah, I think that's our take as well. I think we kind of listen to everybody that has, kind of an educated opinion on it, and those opinions vary dramatically, and we just kind of have to listen to them all and try our best to go where that information sends us. It's a tough one for sure. So along the lines of kind of the things that are included in the package, another question just came through that is, there's an ongoing debate between sector-specific pricing and economy-wide approaches. And what is Niskanen's perspective of what are the benefits of each in terms of effectiveness, but also likelihood to be enacted?
Well, I think that's exactly the question that has to be asked. Kind of the art of the possible. Our recommendations have always fallen towards the economy-wide solutions, but even then, the impacts that those have tend to fall more on the energy sector, just by nature of where the where the products are being used. Yeah, I mean that's I think where we're at. But again, it's we're open to other solutions provided they have the willingness to make it through Congress.
Yeah, and I think CCL's perspective on this is that no one sector, addressing no one sector independently is going to get us to the emissions reduction target we need in the next 30 years. And so, certainly there are sectors, as you point out, that are bigger emitters than others. And so, we're not going to sit here and say it's meaningless to, reduce emissions from the biggest emitting sector. It's just that ultimately there's a final goal, and how are we going to get there if it's not economy-wide and across multiple sectors? And so, I think that's a big question is if you're going to do a sector-specific approach, what's the next step to address another big chunk of emissions? Because it's not enough is ultimately the answer.
No, definitely.
Okay. So that's definitely a complicated one.
Yeah. I think there's the potential for carbon tax to be more useful in some sectors than others. I mean, I think that you're going to have a lot of other complementary policies for the transportation sector. I mean, certainly you're going to have some impact, but a lot of that is just limitations on what's possible now, and what the going back to our work on transmission with the what the grid capabilities are in supporting non-emitting vehicles, green electric vehicles. I think that's there's varying degrees to effectiveness by sector, and we would view economy-wide as the most broadly effective, but you're always going to have additional complementary policies to bring a lot of those other sectors along.
Absolutely, and CCL certainly it has that same mindset that our view, kind of the way we frame it, is that the price is kind of the foundation. I mean, it's the essential kind of core item. But beyond that, you absolutely, and this is why CCL has been engaged in a number of other policies over time, is that you're going to have to do other things along the way. The price will certainly jumpstart and give you the foundation that you need, but it isn't the end. There's a lot more that has to happen, whether it be R&D investment, whether it be tax incentives for adoption of technology, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are going to have to happen over time in order to really get us to the final goal that we all share. Well, we're getting close on time here, so I wanted to cover one less specific climate question, more of a get to know you question. What is at the top of your stack, or what have you been reading lately, or that you'd recommend to others and to our viewers?
Well, I'm working through Bill Gates' climate disaster book at the moment, and I previously read the Michael Lewis, is it The Fifth Risk? Uh, Interesting book. Very much about federal capacity, state capacity, for the work that is uh, done by public servants. I certainly have some differing views from the book, but and quite frankly with Bill Gates' book, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of his urgency, but I think that some of the policy prescription, and to be fair, I haven't gotten, I'm not all the way through all of his solutions, but the I think that it's going to take a combination of these types of thought leaders pushing us in the right direction. So while the Michael Lewis book wasn't explicitly about climate, it definitely touched on it. They cover some of the NOAA staffing issues over the last 5 or 6 years, and some of the capacities there. So very interesting book, very interesting insight into kind of the role that public servants play in our day-to-day lives that we don't even realize. Yeah.
Silent kind of bureaucratic servants.
Very much, very much. I mean, yeah, it's a fascinating book.
Great. No, thank you for that. And well, last question I have before I'll wrap things up is any closing words of wisdom or reflections from today's conversation?
I mean, keep up the great work. The volunteer base at CCL is just absolutely, like I said, second to none. The energy you guys bring to Capitol Hill is just incredible. I worked on the Hill for 10 years, and there are no other groups that bring that consistent and continued energy, and it's necessary. Don't get me wrong. There are staffers and members who gripe about, I heard from them again, but you know what? They remember you guys and they know your issue, and they are, if they don't already know, they are certainly starting to understand why it's so incredibly important, and why it's so near and dear to your hearts.
Oh, thank you for saying that. As a member of the staff, I can say that we could not do our job without our volunteers. They really, are the motivation and the muscle that we need at times to really make change happen. And we're just here to kind of guide that energy that they have as best we can and give them the tools to be effective. So we definitely couldn't do it without them. So thank you for saying that. Well, with that, we're pretty much at our 45-minute mark here. This has been a great conversation, Corey. Thank you so much. For everybody on the screen now is just a brief reminder of where you can find a recording to share with those that couldn't join us live. Lastly, you'll see the websites for Citizens Climate Lobby and for Niskanen Center if you'd like to, learn more and get more involved. We'll be back next month, the same time, same place, fourth Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Eastern time. I believe we will have the National Wildlife Federation joining us next. So thanks again, Corey, and thanks for all the important work that Niskanen is doing, and look forward to continuing to be partners in this movement.
Thanks for having me on. This is wonderful.
Stay safe and be well, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizens Climate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.